Hi, I'm Dove Sinclair of the Power of the Patient Project. My guest today is Mary Ann Cohen. Ms. Cohen has been a professional psychotherapist since 1972 and is the director of the New York Center for Eating Disorders. She's the author of 3 books on recovery from eating disorders: French Toast for Breakfast, Declaring Peace with Emotional Eating; Lasagna for Lunch, Declaring Peace with Emotional Eating; and Treating the Eating Disorder Self. She has also hosted her own radio show on eating disorders in New York, appeared on national television, and lectures extensively to professionals and community groups. Her professional associations include the Academy of Certified Social Workers, the Society of Clinical Social Workers. She is a diplomat of the National Association of Social Workers, and is board certified by the American Board of Examiners in Clinical Social Work. Ms. Cohen maintains a private practice in Park Slope, Brooklyn, and she also teaches and supervises other professionals. So welcome, Ms. Cohen.
Thank you. Please call me Mary Ann.
Mary Ann. Okay.
Okay.
So you've written 3 books on emotional eating. Can you
Yes.
explain to us how the reader can become at peace with emotional eating?
Excellent question. First, let me tell you what emotional eating is. So I originated this term around 1985. Now we see it, maybe 1982, we see it all over the place. But I want to tell you what it is and then how readers can make peace. So emotional eating is when people turn to food or away from food, not because of hunger, not because of hunger from their stomach, but because of hunger from the heart. That they're using food as a tool to try to help them solve certain life problems. So it's interesting because eating disorders or disordered eating, struggles with emotional eating, is about food. For the binge eater, it's about consuming large amounts of food. For the bulimic, it's about getting rid of food through either vomiting or exercise, excess exercise or laxatives. And through the anorexic, it's about refusal of food. But each of these people, the binge eater, the bulimic, the anorexic, are all trying to solve their emotional problems of life. So what makes declaring peace with emotional eating so difficult is that it is about food and it's not about food. It's about eating, but it's also about emotions. So emotional eating is when, as I said, you're hungry from the heart and not from the stomach. Emotional eating is when you're lonely in the middle of the night and you turn to the refrigerator looking for comfort. Emotional eating is when you feel bored and empty and you don't know what to do with yourself, so you binge and then you make yourself throw up. Emotional eating is when you refuse to eat because you feel your life is out of control and trying to get thin is the way you try to grab control. So emotional eating is used to distract, deny, and detour many different feeling states, which we'll talk about later what they are, because it's important for people to be able to identify their personal triggers. So it's to deny, distract, and detour. And for the emotional eater, food is used as a drug that can comfort you, that can soothe you, that can even make you feel guilty about your eating when maybe you're feeling guilty about something else. And emotional eating is when you're angry at someone and you don't feel able to express it directly, so you bite and chew into food. So the reason that emotional eating is so frequent is that food is the most available, cheapest, socially sanctioned, mood altering drug on the market. And it is a mood altering drug. So this is why food is used so extensively. It's cheap, it's available, socially sanctioned, and really helps people change their mood when they're in a state that they don't know how to handle more directly.
Right. So then how does the reader become at peace with these
Okay.
struggles?
I think it's a three-pronged process. The first prong is awareness.
Mhm.
The person has to become aware. What are the people, places, and things that trigger me for binging, bulimia, self-starvation? And becoming aware of the triggers is really the first step. Awareness and viewing what you're doing with food gives you a little bit of a perspective standing outside of yourself and trying to figure out and observe and be curious about why and when and what situations are making you turn to food. So awareness is the first step. The second step is taking action. And the actions are many, many actions. They could be going to a self-help group. They could be going to a psychotherapist with a specialty in eating problems. They could be reading self-help books on this problem, speaking to an internist, and accessing certain podcasts. So the varieties of help is very much dependent on what someone particularly is struggling with. We at the New York Center for Eating Disorders believe that everybody's eating disorder or eating problem is unique as a fingerprint.
Mhm.
So we try to custom tailor an approach that works for each individual. What works for Amanda might not work for John. What works for John today might not work for John in a year from now.
Mhm.
What works for one may not work for the other. So we have multiple ways of handling it, usually a combination of psychotherapy to get to the root cause of the problem, plus behavioral and cognitive strategies, helping someone break through their same habitual behaviors or their same habitual uh, self-talk that's usually quite not compassionate. So awareness plus action equals results. Now, let me add that many people who come to see me have said, I got a lot of awareness about what makes me tick with my eating and my life when I was in therapy before, but it didn't help my eating problem. Other people come to me and they said, I got like a lot of great techniques and strategies, but that didn't help me because I'm still depressed and I'm still overeating and I still feel fat and ugly. So it's this blending of awareness plus action that leads to results.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that and explaining that to us. And now moving on, I've read one of your articles on the negative effects of juicing. So can you share the dangers of this seemingly harmless trend?
Sure, there's nothing wrong with an occasional juice. There's not, it's delicious, it's easy, it's nutritious. There's nothing wrong with it. Just like there's nothing wrong with becoming a runner or a bodybuilder.
Mhm.
But what we're talking about is when this seemingly innocuous behavior starts to take on a life of its own. So I've seen that with people, and I want to use bodybuilders as well because I've worked with bodybuilders, and it starts out great. The person feels lighter, the person feels like they're doing a healthy behavior, but when it becomes a lifestyle and they no longer eat regular food, no longer taking in a variety of nutrition, because with juicing, you're drinking. But part of satisfaction has to do with chewing food. So juices are great, but not as a lifestyle.
Mm.
I've noticed that people turn to juicing or cleansing, and it takes on a life of its own when they're going through a transition or a loss. And by the way, this is the same thing with dieting. People grab onto the diet to give them structure, to give them a scaffolding, to give them something to hold on to when life is feeling shaky. So it can help when someone is in a transition deal with anxiety, but it doesn't really resolve the problem. So anything taken to an extreme no longer becomes just juicing. It becomes an attempt to solve anxiety or depression. I'll give you an example from my practice, and any examples I may use today are changed for confidentiality, both name and other data for confidentiality. So I had this young woman come to me, we'll call her Ava. She was going through a divorce and she was really miserable and felt very bad about herself and very self-critical. And she discovered juicing and became like this great way of life. And she felt more powerful, she felt stronger, she felt prettier. But then she started cheating on the juicing and feeling guilty about it. So she had this regime in her mind, but then she started like adding cookies or donuts, and she began to see that this was not going to be a long-term viable solution. So she realized that she needed to stop. And when she stopped, she felt worse because the depression about her divorce, the feelings of failure came bubbling up to the surface. But that was the good news, because until we got to that point, she was just juicing it down and drinking it down and swallowing it down, but it was never getting digested. And digesting our feelings is part of moving through them, moving through the pain, the uncertainty. And a lot of people have to face that there are many aspects of life that are uncertain for all of us, and that we have to tolerate that without the chronic crutch of juicing, running, dieting. So Ava got worse, felt worse. She didn't get worse. She felt worse when she gave up the juicing before she got better. And being able to marinate, and I'm using food terms here, marinate with her feelings, digest what she went through, chew on the loss of her marriage, really helped her in a way that the juicing, the laxatives, the dieting, whatever someone grabs onto, could never fully do beyond a brief period of time.
Right, right. So if someone's into juicing, then how do they know when it's becoming a problem if they're doing it too much? Like, where is that barrier?
I think it's different for everybody. I don't know that there's one thing. Well, okay, here's a couple of things. If your behavior is getting in the way of a full range of nutrition, or if your behavior is getting in the way of your social life or your work life. The woman I work with who is a bodybuilder, it was also a period of transition. I'd like to talk about her. I'll call her Marie. Marie discovered that her father had a diagnosis of cancer and not long to live. At that very moment, she decided to become a bodybuilder. She started training for a competition, which she won, by the way. And she brought in her little packages of vitamins and her little colored, coordinated packages of food. And when the competition was over, she said, I feel like the rug's been pulled out from under me. I realized I never felt anything about the fact that my father was dying, and he died when she was in the midst of the competition. So she came to the realization on her own. First of all, the competition ended. It was a natural ending, but she came to the realization that was so striking that she had never felt anything about her father. And she was able to recognize that she turned to this behavior as a way of detouring her emotions and shoving them under the rug.
Right.
So people have to be alert. What in my life am I not facing?
Mm-hmm.
What in my life don't I want to face? What about facing this experience is going to be hard on me? And what support am I going to build into place that the juicing, the running, the laxatives, the bodybuilding, the dieting has provided for me?
Right. Yeah. That's great information. Thank you for painting those pictures. So my next question is, are girls more prone to developing eating disorders? And if so, why? And in your opinion, what is the best way to prevent or manage an eating disorder in a society that is so focused on body image, especially in our youth today?
Right. That's a great question. I want to say that men, I'll get to girls and women, but I want to say that men are not exempt from having eating struggles. And so I just want to say up front that we work with men and women both, young men, teenage girls, but that obviously girls and women have a great deal of pressure. In our culture, thinness is equated with lovability, desirability, success in work, success in a relationship. And these messages are inculcated from very, very young. I had one girl tell me that she thought at the age of 5, she was a teenager at this point, that she was too fat. Now, where does a 5-year-old get this idea? It's so much embedded in the culture. So we have Hollywood celebrities, we have advertising, we have social media, and all of this points to thinness is desirability and lovability. And this is very hard to break. However, it is changing. There are now plus size models, there's a lot more plus size clothes. And I recommend that people check out different body positivity workshops, body positivity podcasts, and that there's a lot of information about health at every size, HAES, health at every size, and how you don't have to be a certain weight to love yourself and to feel acceptable. So the media clearly does breed perpetual dissatisfaction in how women feel about their bodies. I mean, think about it. This is before your time, I'm sure, but when Twiggy was in vogue, you know, the model Twiggy,
Yep.
anyone who looked like Marilyn Monroe was considered fat. When Marilyn Monroe was in vogue, anyone who looked like Twiggy was considered skinny. So the media breeds perpetual dissatisfaction, and social media also. So Snapchat and Twitter and all that. So being able to help someone evaluate what they're looking at, particularly online, and how it's impacting them. Again, the power of observation, to stand outside of yourself and to realize that the message you're getting may be fostering a lot of lack of self-confidence and a lot of lack of compassion for a perfectly good body.
Mm-hmm.
And even someone who is heavier or overweight can still make peace with their body as well.
Yeah. I think that's really important too, making peace with your body, like loving yourself. It makes a huge difference in everyday life. And now my last question is, so what are the different treatment approaches that help someone resolve their eating problem?
Sure. Let's say, first of all, that pandemic eating is a problem. And since we're heading into Eating Disorder Awareness Week, let's acknowledge people are socially isolated with the pandemic, frustrated, bored, having trouble dealing with a social life when you're under lockdown. And what's the most available, cheapest mood altering drug on the market? It's food. Also, alcohol. People are drinking a lot more. Um, and it was hilarious that the liquor stores were considered essential businesses that were allowed to be open even when everything else was locking down. So pandemic eating is a thing that just needs to be acknowledged. And there are all sorts of jokes and memes. There's my favorite is the refrigerator is saying to itself as the woman opens it for the 10th time that morning, do you have nothing better to do? You keep checking in with me. So I want to mention that. I think it's important. Do you want to say anything about that and pandemic eating? Anything you've noticed with friends or family?
I think I've seen a lot of people definitely binge eating, watching Netflix, and
Right,
drinking heavily as well, or just even more than normal.
right, right. And I think it helps. And then I'll get on to the different approaches, the treatment approaches, but I think it helps to recognize that boredom really is an emotion and that we New Yorkers or we Americans love stimulation. And when we're told wear masks, don't go out, wash your hands ad nauseum, it's very boring. And I work with people who have young children at home, and it's driving them crazy. And food is a little oasis, a treat in the middle of the day. But let's acknowledge that we're all in the same boat and we're all going through something similar. And hopefully there's a light at the end of the tunnel with vaccines and people taking care of the protocols.
Yeah.
So there's several different treatment approaches to help someone. The first is to really come to understand and believe that diets do not work. A diet is an external dictate about what you should do in order to lose weight. And people can be very good about going on diets, and they work, diets work, until they don't.
Mhm.
And what happens is, because forbidden fruit is the sweetest, if you're told on the diet you cannot have bagels and cream cheese, what are you going to start craving more than anything? Bagels and cream cheese. So the diet, although initially it works, it also has the seeds of its destruction embedded in it because it's all about restriction. It doesn't teach you how to make peace with food, how to hopefully connect your eating with hunger, inner hunger, and stop when you're full. And for every diet on the table that someone's following, an equal and opposite binge is waiting to grab them when they can no longer tolerate the 4 ounces of cottage cheese, the 4 ounces of fish. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So how does someone lose weight if diets don't work? It's really about trying to reclaim eating according to hunger
Mhm.
and to reclaim stopping eating when we're full. Now, this is very hard because people have given up the control for their eating to diets for often decades, and they need to be able to turn inward to be able to access hunger and fullness. So just to remember, restriction always leads to binging. The second treatment option is working on, as we talked about before, habits
Yeah.
and negative thoughts. So people, like I work with a lot of teachers, they come home and they overeat in front of the television as a way of shifting gears from the workday and finding alternate behaviors so that food is not the only game in town. There's nothing wrong with eating. Food is great. But if it's the only game in town to help with emotional stress, then you're really limiting yourself, and finding other habits that are more productive in addition to food can be very supportive. Also, helping yourself with negative thoughts. I ate this cookie today, I'm a failure. Well, a cookie is just a cookie. A cookie never made anyone fat. And then someone will say to me, well, but I ate the whole sleeve of cookies. So that was your dinner. Move on and forgive yourself, because people often try to play catch up. You know, I ate this sleeve of cookies, so tomorrow I'm not going to eat breakfast or lunch. And then the cycle perpetuates, because dieting is a vicious cycle. The making up for it and compensating for having eaten too much will often trigger someone to go back to another binge. So that's the second treatment approach: habits and self-critical thoughts. And I say that self-compassion, even if you've had trouble with your eating, is the most important ingredient in getting yourself back on track. Learn from what happened to you with the difficult food experience. Learn what triggered. Plan how you can handle it the next time around. Strategize other alternatives, but move on.
Right.
Then the third treatment approach, which is what I do in addition to the others, is psychotherapy. And as I mentioned, psychotherapy gets to the root cause of the different stresses in someone's life that maybe causes them to turn to food. I'll name some of them: depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, grief, trauma, sexual abuse, boredom, anger. So these are some of the emotions that people turn to food or away from food because they're struggling to cope with that. And I want to say grief is a very important factor in a long-term eating disorder struggle, that many people have had losses that they have not, to use my word, digested before. And this is an important trigger. Now, with some people, medication can be very helpful because it resets the body, takes care of some of the depression or anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder. Not everybody, but some people are actually medicating themselves with food. And when they can be under the treatment of a doctor who can monitor certain medications, they find they can diminish their eating and feel better with their mood.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's great. Thank you so much for providing all of us with this great information. It's very thorough. Is there anything
I'd
else?
like to, yeah, I'd like to, first of all, I just want to show you my book, French Toast for Breakfast. And I want to read to you what I wrote in this book about healing, what it means to heal an eating disorder. Shall I do that? Can I do that? Okay. Healing means learning that food is not your enemy, and that food was put on this earth to give you pleasure and to satisfy your hunger. True healing has to do with your inner state of learning other nourishing ways of comforting yourself and soothing yourself. Healing an eating problem is about reclaiming the vitality of your inner self that may have been hidden by a consuming relationship with food and a devotion to avoiding the emotions that are stressing you out. But most of all, healing is about hope. And one of the things that we do at the New York Center for Eating Disorders is to help people cultivate and develop hope. Hope that their relationship with food can be healed, hope that they can be more at peace with their bodies. And I always say, we need to help people learn to sink their teeth into life and not into their relationship with food.
Wow, that was beautiful. Thank
If
you.
anyone wants to contact me, let me just say my website, and there are articles there. The article about juicing is there that we talked about. My website is www.emotionaleating.org, O-R-G.
Perfect.
Okay.
But thank you so much for joining me today. I'm sure all of our viewers will really appreciate this.
Thank you for having me.